Hey, great. Well, welcome everybody. This is so exciting. I see so many people have joined, and welcome to our event this evening. I wanted to take a minute to introduce myself. I'm Noel Ellison. I am a member of the Board of Advisors for the Center for Global Business, the CGB. And I've served on the board for 3 years. I've gotten a chance to meet a lot of the IB students over this time, and it's pretty cool that it makes me feel a lot more connected to the program. So this is our CGB Global Impact Speaker Series, and really want to welcome you guys tonight. And I get to the enjoyment of getting to speak tonight with Jacquelyn Maroney, who is a friend and a colleague. I work with her in my profession and in global mobility, which is pretty exciting. And so tonight I get to highlight her and everything that she does and really bring to you guys the special things that happen in global mobility and the globalized world of commerce that we work in, specifically immigration for Jackie. So welcome, Jackie.
Well, thank you, Noel. Thanks for having me. Nice to see all of you.
Yeah. Well, good. So I thought maybe I could give a little bit about myself. I recognize some faces already on screen, and it's exciting to see familiar faces out there. But just so you know, in addition to being on the CGB Board of Advisors, I'm a partner at KPMG. I've spent my career with KPMG, and that's a lot of years, more than two hands to count on. And I do global mobility, which means I help companies in all industries, in all different headquarters around the world, send people around the world. So an expat is somebody who's working in one country who crosses a border to go work in another country. And I get to deal with that on a day-to-day basis and help companies find the right fit for their business needs at the time. And that segues into Jackie, why I know you. So if you'd introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, nice to see all of you. My name's Jacquelyn Maroney. I'm a U.S. immigration attorney and a partner with the law firm of Ogletree Deakins. Ogletree Deakins does employment and immigration law. We have 1,050 attorneys and 59 offices. And I practice business immigration, and that's an important part of what we do at Ogletree. We have 600 people that practice business immigration. So we work as a part of global mobility. And so Noelle and I work together because, she's with the Big Four. The Big Four traditionally don't practice law in the United States. So we team up. So law firms and the Big Four will team up, and the law firm will provide advice and counsel and work in the United States. And the Big Four do practice law outside the United States. So we'll do the US piece. And like in this instance, KPMG will do the legal piece outside the US. And that way we'll support multinational organizations, not just in the US, but around the world. So it's pretty interesting. And it's also been a pretty dynamic area recently, immigration and global mobility. So happy to talk more about that tonight.
Good. Okay, so I know why I got into global mobility. I had a passion for traveling the world, but working and wanting to work and spend my life in a global career. And I've had the good fortune of living in France and living in Germany and spending 2 years with KPMG in Australia. And this career has just been an amazing connection for me. So, Jackie, first of all, how did you get into immigration? Like, what was your passion there?
So I knew I wanted to go to law school. I always wanted to go to law school. And then when I went to law school, there's all these different areas, and I was kind of looking around. And I had in undergrad, studied Spanish and lived in Spanish-speaking countries. So I did a foreign study in Spain. I did a foreign study in Costa Rica. I did another one in DC, which is its own type of foreign country. So I did a full year, outside the campus environment. And then in law school, I did an internship at the U.S. Embassy in La Paz, Bolivia. And I got that because I spoke Spanish. So that was great. And I traveled all over South America. So I've always loved to travel. I've always loved languages. I've always been interested in other cultures. And then when I started at a big law firm, they said, like, hey, you worked in the embassy? Like, do you want to do immigration? And so I did some projects there. And now I've been doing that, my whole career.
Awesome. I love that. That's great. And it'll be really interesting to see what the rest of the students end up doing and what their stepping stones to doing something international is. So, okay, when you introduced yourself, you brought up a really important point, and I think I want to make sure that everybody on the call today is kind of aware. You say you do business immigration. Can you define that a little differently, or what does that mean? Because we hear immigration a lot in the news, and so
Yeah, immigration is a super hot topic. It's in the Wall Street Journal every day. And so if you just think about, people that are living and working in the US, there's three types of immigration. There's family-based immigration. So that's where, for example, there's a US citizen sponsoring a spouse or children or whatever it might be. That's family immigration. I don't do that. There's humanitarian immigration. So that might be like DACA, the Dreamers, TPS, asylum seekers, that's humanitarian immigration. And then there's business immigration. So employers can sponsor foreign nationals to live and work in the United States. And that's a big part of the American dream here. I mean, America is built on attracting the best and the brightest. And those, for example, would be people that come over to UT on F1 student visas and then later graduate and get work visas that are sponsored by US employers. And, my firm like helps make all that happen.
yeah. No, thanks for that. So I love what you do, and I love that we get to work arm in arm together because you're right. I mean, there's so many different aspects of mobility. And when I talk to clients, with the idea of helping to move human capital around the world, I talk about the tax aspects of it. I talk about the expense and relocation aspects of it. And then, of course, there's also the immigration aspect that all have to go hand in hand, like physically moving people, policies, how to pay people, and then actually giving them permission to work in that other country. And so I guess you break it down into different like durations, like a short-term visa or mid-term visa or a longer-term visa or permanent residency type issues. And I guess you dabble in all of those for various reasons.
I'm an expert in all of those. I'm not just dabbling in those things, but let me talk a little bit about workforce planning. So when it
Okay.
comes to employer sponsorship, and business immigration, there's going to be two paths that we often see. So one would be the mobility path. And so when we're talking about multinational companies doing talent mapping and workforce planning, like that's where Noel comes in. So they're saying, okay, I want to build semiconductors in this country, and this country, and this country, but not that country. And so that's like their talent mapping. So they're looking at the whole world. And so, for example, right now we see a lot of our clients who in prior decades have worked a lot in China, and now they're looking to move that to Malaysia, or they're moving that to Thailand or something like that. So that's like global talent mapping and workforce planning.
Mhm.
So there's mobility hires. So if someone is in London or they're in Hong Kong and they're moving into the US, that would be what we would call a mobility hire. And we would transfer them from those locations into the US, like on a temporary work visa. So for example, it's called an L1 work visa. And so people will come in temporarily on that. They have like 5 or 7 years, which we still call temporary. Like anything that's not forever is temporary in the
Okay.
framework. And then we'll work on getting them permanent residence. And most employers are sponsoring for permanent residence because they want the engagement to be long-standing and not limited to 3 years or 5 years or 7 years. But also that makes them competitive in the market. So a lot of companies, if they're not going to sponsor someone for US permanent residence, so a green card, that makes them less competitive, as an employer. So that's the mobility path into the US.
Okay. Great.
And then let me tell you the other path, and this is what I would call like local hires. So local hires are people who are not transferred into the US by the employer, but rather they just applied for a job. So for example, if you go and apply for a job, there's going to be all kinds of people applying. There are going to be US workers applying. There will also be people who need employer sponsorship to get that job. So another typical path that we see would be people that come to the US on F1 student visas. They graduate from UT or wherever institution, and then they have to transition from that F1 work visa onto, for example, an H1B work visa. And those are what we would call local hires. And that's most of what we do, actually. Like if you look at our portfolio of work, um, you know, 80% of it, 90% of it are local hires, and then 10 or 20% would be mobility hires.
That's great. Yeah, no, thanks for that. And I'm sure it's probably relevant for some of the people dialed in today and making sure they're aware of kind of those immigration issues that they're facing. But certainly, I'm always conversant with mobility issues around in what I do from day to day. And the thing is, I never take for granted that somebody's a citizen or a national of any particular country. So I'm always inquiring, like, well, what is your citizenship? And I don't take for granted that just because they speak English or speak a certain language, that they're necessarily a national of that country, and those are things that we can easily take for granted. So um, what are some of the factors in business like that put pressure on what you do day to day? I mean, you talk about applying for a visa and it's as easy as that, and you make it sound so easy because I'm sure what you're very good at what you do, of course, but there have to be outside factors that really limit what you do, and you have to be strategic with what those thresholds or limits are that maybe governments are placing on visas.
Yes. So, there is a very stringent legal framework for all of this. And in the US, it's generally US Congress that drives it. So Congress has laid out these various work visas. And, what I do is like the highly skilled work visas. And generally speaking, like the business community is united in the fact that the US wants to hire and retain the best and brightest. So traditionally speaking, business immigration and highly skilled work visas are not, controversial. Everything is dynamic right now, but even for example, you know how we love our football coaches? So Tommy Tuberville, who used to coach Auburn, he did come out recently and say like, hey, Alabama needs more highly skilled workers, US workers or whatever it takes. We need the best and the brightest here in Alabama because we have engineers, but we need more. And I think most states, feel that way. So Congress, though, says, hey, you can only have so many of these a year. So Congress says, hey, there's only 85,000 of these H-1B highly skilled work visas available each year. And there are, for example, 450,000 requests each year. And actually, so the
Wow.
government runs a lottery. The lottery opens this Friday. So this is a big time of year for us. But if 450,000 people request an H-1B, by request, I mean the employer requests the H-1B, and there are only 85,000 available. There are certain preferences for those that have US advanced degrees, so US masters or higher. So if you have a US masters or higher, those workers are perhaps have a 42% chance of winning the lottery. If the worker has, a foreign degree, then it goes down to like 19-20%. So
I
Congress
love
decides all of that.
I love that language of winning the lottery because it makes you seem really excited, which of course your livelihood in getting a work visa must be a really exciting thing. But I always think of a lottery, like maybe I'm going to win a few $1,000,000 or something. But
Well, lottery is the right word because it is totally random. It's not like the employer,
of
it's
course,
not like med school where there's a match system where the employer says like, hey, these 100 are my favorite. Like there's no match. And then every year a student who doesn't win says like, I know you said it was random, but like, I went to UT or I went to MIT or wherever. I thought I was going to get it. And I was like, no, the government doesn't care about any of that. It's totally random.
wow. Okay. So how does that impact what you're doing and how you're helping companies, though? I mean, if it's really a lottery system, are there things that you do or the way you advise businesses to help increase their odds?
Well, one of the things that we like about working with multinational companies, and Noel, this is where you and your colleagues come in, is so for example, if there are a class of recent grads and their F1 visa work auth is expiring and they don't win that lottery, then we do look to see where we can talent map them abroad. So maybe if they have to rotate out of the US for a while, maybe we can bring them back in a year as a transfer, but maybe they
Mhm.
can go to Canada. Maybe they can go to London. Maybe they can go to Hong Kong. So looking to see where else that company is doing business and can we um, park someone in one of those countries, for lack
Okay.
of a better word.
Okay, that's really interesting because, and this is a fun story. I had a company that needed to bring somebody that was going to be operating at a COO level into the US. And let me tell you how they did that. He was a Danish national, a Danish resident that they first started putting onto the payroll in the UK because they had an entity in the UK. So from Denmark, he was paid from the UK and registered in the UK. And then they sent him to Canada and they employed him in Canada for a year. So from Denmark to Canada, and then ultimately they got him to the US. So we had to do a tax
Yes.
memo. And so this was all driven because of the immigration, but we had to do a tax memo to talk about where do we pay him from? How do we pay him? What currency do we pay him in? Kroner or dollars or pounds or, and how can we get him onto the right? And this guy had tax ID numbers. They called him 007 because he had so many passports, and it was kind of a fun thing. But it was a very memorable experience, and I love how a lot of our executives that do get moved around the world are so flexible to adapt and accommodate, because ultimately they're serving the business and the business needs. And the immigration, we have to solve those problems, or you get to solve those problems. I solve the tax problems. But yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that.
Well, it used to be easier too before the UK left the EU, because then, you could sort of had a little bit more flexibility, but now, after Brexit, it becomes more difficult to send someone to London. So, the person from Denmark couldn't just go work in London, they need a work permit. So that's the other reason why it all has become quite complicated.
Yeah, I think they might be rethinking that decision in some respects. Maybe not. I don't know.
Well, let me ask you a question, Noel. So
Okay.
on the mobility space and like with workforce planning, like what factors are you see, like how do companies decide, where they're going to send someone other than the example you already gave?
Yeah, no, for sure. Like these are top of mind for a lot of companies, and companies are constantly thinking, how do I grow? How do we increase value for shareholders? And when they come to me and they go to their HR programs for like moving talent, there are probably three main drivers, I would say. And the first of those is going to be maybe a project-based idea. So let's say it's a company that does construction or manufacturing, and they need a new power plant in Malaysia. Well, they're going to bid on that contract. They're going to take a bunch of their engineers and they're going to ship them to Malaysia for 6 months to 5 years until that project is done. And so that's one of the reasons for that. There's another reason they would do it, which would be they're entering a new country and they need the right level and the right skills in that country to expand services. So think of brands like Starbucks or Wingstop. I mean, that's one that kind of blows my mind. I'm like, really? I mean, I know we eat wings, but Wingstop is seriously pushing their brand globally, and they want the right level of talent for setting up shop, franchisees, or corporate locations for that. And then the other main reason that we see it too is um, development or leadership development. And what I mean by that is you've got a lot of individuals in a company, and you want to give them and just like me going to Australia, giving me the opportunity, and especially as somebody who works in the global mobility space, to have lived abroad and know what it's like to live abroad, be able to be more empathetic towards the global business climate, which is there consistent internet in all of these locations? Is it easy to get internet set up in your home? Is it how do you order food? How do you set up a bank account? Do banking hours impact, and so when I talk to an expat about moving abroad, I know exactly what it means to try to pack up your goods, put them on a boat for a month, and then arrive in a new country. And then I guess the other thing too would be leadership development. So when the company is looking at who's going to be their next CFO or COO or technology officer, they want those individuals to have an understanding of the business. And so if the business already has a global footprint, understanding what it means to do business in Asia Pac or in EMEA or in LATAM. So yeah, that's kind of what I see. And then the companies will build policies and programs around that to figure out how to move people around, and then they build on, well, this is more efficient because we can easily get visas for this type of employee to
Right.
get them around. And so it kind of is this is the goal of the program, but we're also going to bend the program based on things that you see, which is the immigration, the likelihood of having individuals go into that new country. So it's good. Yeah.
And then I think on top of that, there are the other external factors. So, Ireland famously has very favorable tax laws for US corporations. So looking not just at the business reasons, but the external reasons on where people want to do business, where they want to be headquartered, where they want to put people, because it's either beneficial from a tax perspective or beneficial as far as like movement of people is easier or the cost is more effective. So those are all reasons that companies are looking at for where to place their workforce, within a global footprint.
Sure. Actually, there was an Austin-based company that set up their international operations, and I think they put their IP in Ireland. And then the main stakeholder of the company said, "Hey, you know what? This might be a good place for me to spend a year with my family. I think this would benefit my kids a lot." And so he packed up his family and they moved to Ireland for a year. And now I think they're back in Austin. But yeah, there are a lot of reasons. You never know. So, okay, Jackie, you were talking about the political climate and how governments restrict immigration. I mean, what are you hearing these days? Like there's been a lot of change lately with our new administration and our foreign relations. How are you seeing that put pressure on companies to get visas?
So it has been very dynamic in the US. And I think one of the things is like when you hear it in I guess it wasn't a real State of the Union yesterday, but the meeting with the House, whatever they were calling it, with the current president, all the things are related. So the discussion about, international relations and treaties, that all impacts global mobility. It all impacts immigration. So for example, the discussion of renegotiating the US Mexico Canada agreement, which used to be NAFTA. I mean, there's a specific, that is about movement of goods, but also people, because there are specific work visas that are embedded in that USMCA. So specifically, there's one called TN, and only passport holders from Canada and Mexico are eligible. And that's been long standing. I mean, that has been available for decades and is an important part of moving people into the US for multinational businesses. And employers are concerned. I mean, there has been no reassurance that that renegotiation would not impact that TN visa. So, I mean, that is one example of how international relations is impacting, business planning and immigration. And then I think that the discussion of tariffs is going to be important. So, in international relations and in immigration, there's always the concept of reciprocity. So typically what you will see in US immigration is if one country, does that to the United States, like they do it in return. And that's on very, very small things. So for example, like if a country will only issue US citizens visas, which are travel documents for 2 years, well, the US does the same to them. So every single little thing that another country limits or places on the United States, like we do the same thing back. So that's how reciprocity works in immigration. But we've started to see things that aren't really related now related. So for example, I think maybe the first weekend with the new president after the inauguration, the administration was upset because a plane of migrants that were being returned from the US to Colombia was saying, like, we're not going to take them.
I remember that.
And right away they said, well, if you don't take that plane full of people, like people from Colombia are not coming into the United States. And it wasn't all people from Colombia, but it was like, hey, we're not going to let in certain visa holders. So
So
now,
like executives maybe. So kind of like if you don't take these migrants who are crossing the border or that aren't on the right immigration, then we're going to restrict your business travelers. And that's going to, okay,
and
interesting.
those two things, normally I would not have thought that those two things were related. I mean, I guess they were
No,
somewhat related because we were talking about people. So like you won't take these people and then I'm not going to take your people, but those two things are typically not related. So I think that there could be many things that come up with um, the tariff impacts that ripple out in the next,
gotcha.
year or few years. And, there's going to be reciprocity or, retribution, this for that in new areas that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, no, I mean it's clear we all need to make sure we're recognizing that we're in a global economy. And there are the business forces that go, well, so talk about this. I mean, are there business consortiums that do not strong arms the wrong word, but that do put pressure on our government and embassies to listen to what our business and economic needs are? Is that still housed within government? Or is there a public private kind of way to help expand the limit of H-1B visas, for example?
So we do partner with our clients, government affairs teams, and most of our clients, we work for large multinational organizations, so they have very sophisticated government affairs teams, and we'll partner with them on how to lobby or what to lobby on, or yes, weigh in on this thing, or no, that thing doesn't really matter that much, like, save your gunpowder on that. And they are often part of, I don't know if I would call it like a consortium, but like trade associations.
Okay.
And, one lobbyist and then from that trade association will push out a letter and ask our clients to sign on and support, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the trade associations are still valuable in an important way that our clients are engaging with the US government on, immigration, highly skilled visas, H-1Bs, green cards, all those things.
Okay, that's good to know. Um, great. So what about, there have been a lot of activities in the administration with Doge, and how does that impact? Is there an impact on that? I mean, Doge is really trying to cut and restrict the number of employees, or find efficiencies, and may not be doing a more thorough evaluation of what those employees are doing. But does that have an impact on immigration and getting people into the US?
So, I think it will, and I think there have been some ways in which it has started. So U.S. immigration is administered by various government agencies. So there's the USCIS, which is the Immigration Service. There's Department of Labor, who is charged with protecting wages and job opportunities for U.S. workers. And then there's the Department of State, which are the U.S. embassy posts around the world that actually interface with people and issue visas to travel to the U.S. So all of those are federal employees, obviously. Those three agencies have not yet been the subject of as far as I know, like a massive review or audit or layoff or anything like that. However, on Feb 20, there was an executive order with a hiring freeze for federal workers, including backfills. And then we know that, some people lost their jobs when there was the administration change, some others quit. There have been no backfills. So we're always concerned about like the government gears need to keep moving so that I can do the work that I do, and so that our clients, the multinational employers, can keep their workforce, engaged. So slowdowns and delays are a major concern, not just Doge, but with any administration change. So we do need those federal workers. I am worried about that. And one of the things that we also saw in a January 20 executive order was regarding extreme vetting. And I would say like that's the immigration theme of the year for 2025, which is everything that needs to be done by the government, it being done in a more robust way. So for example, many people, when they go and they get a visa stamp to travel into the United States, they were not previously required to go in person to the embassy post and like stand there in front of the bulletproof glass and like pass their papers underneath. That was my job when I was an intern, by the way.
Oh, wow, cool.
Yeah. So I would take the papers. But now, about a week and a half ago, the government said, whoa, 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 no, most people need to go in person to a US embassy post abroad. Well, I mean, that's going to be a problem. Like there
That's
aren't
a big
enough
deal.
workers to sort of manage that higher demand. And so what we're going to see are going to be longer delays and wait times for getting those
Wow.
visa stamps, which means if you're moving a mobility hire over, they have to go do that process. So they're going to have to wait longer. It's going to slow down the transfer to the US. So the business is not going to be happy about that. And
I
then
mean,
we're also going to see like our existing workforce that's in the US. I mean, most people want to travel home for the festive season. And we're going to see people who say like, hey, I can't go because I can't get a visa appointment and it's too risky. And so I'm just not going to see my family this year. And we feel, badly about that.
that makes me sad.
It is
But
sad.
I mean, really, I do. It's almost like saying it's a step backwards. I mean, I think of how horrible it is to have to go to get my driver's license, and I'm so excited that now you can do certain renewals online and you don't have to go in person. And now if I were told again that I'd have to go back in person, oh my goodness. That is crazy. But honestly, I mean, look, my reaction is an individual human being. I mean, this has a huge impact on business, right? Like keeping commerce going, and like the practical matter of identifying a resource for a job and trying to bring them in to do that job effectively. And I always do think that there's a confusion in our media between the immigration that you and I are talking about today versus the immigration issues that are at our borders necessarily. And it's important to recognize that our businesses, we need people, they need resources to fill jobs and do jobs effectively and create a competitive environment for their business. And when Congress slows down immigration issues that are more geared towards the border crisis versus business, that's a big deal.
And what we ultimately, I'm a US citizen, right? So like what we ultimately want is for US to be the most sought after place to do business and work like in the world, right? We want to be like world competitive. And anything that impedes the flow of business into the United States or makes it less attractive, is a problem. So
Exactly.
I would like to see us be more welcoming, to the best and the brightest and the highly skilled workers. And it's going to be a journey though. We're not there yet.
Yeah, but honestly, look, my business thrives on my team being well versed in mobility. And I think about it not just, look, as a partner of KPMG, where in my career I've had the good fortune to my team has hosted people from, well, I have somebody working for me from the UK right now for 2 years. And we've had two rotations from Finland, a woman from Denmark for 2 years. I brought somebody in from India, but that took 5 years to bring somebody from India just because of the visa backlog. But at the same time, I want the team that I hire from the University of Texas and from other campuses in Texas to have the opportunity to go and work abroad. One of my senior managers has worked in Switzerland. Another one worked, we're trying to send to Sweden for some time. And like, this is what is important to me, is that I have a team that represents the global, faces of the clients that I work with, and that we can continue to thrive on that. So, I mean, what you do is hugely important. Without you, I would have nothing.
Think that might be a quite the overstatement, but I do feel like I'm lucky to do the work that we're doing. I mean, I feel like we're doing important work that's impactful to people's lives while also solving business problems in a corporate environment where you can also like make a good living, right? So
Yeah, of
I
course.
think it's been a nice field.
Okay, well, I'm going to pivot a little bit. So let's talk about national security and what are we doing, or how does immigration play a role in protecting national security, and what sort of things are you seeing in terms of retinal scans or fingerprints, or technology in passports or technology in visas? What is that? What's happening there?
Um, So every part of the immigration process has a national security component. So before any specific person, is allowed to enter the United States, they go through several checks. So they're typically going to be going through a check at the U.S. Embassy post in their home country. Of course, they go through an FBI background check as part of that. And then they're also like fingerprinted and inspected again after they get off the plane in the United States. So they go through all of these different checks. But from the employer's perspective, and when you're talking about workforce planning, it's not just where do you put a factory, where do you put a plant, but what type of factory and what type of plant, and are there sensitive and controlled technologies as part of that business? So every part of immigration is also related to the export control and the prohibitions thereof of sensitive technologies. So if, for example, there is a worker in the United States and they have access to a sensitive technology, whether that's a semiconductor or code or chemicals or nuclear, or it could be anything. It could also be certain parts of like the oil and gas field. So if somebody based in your U.S. business has access to that, then that's going to be considered a deemed export of that sensitive technology to a foreign person. And so all parts of immigration have to be vetted and cleared for potential export of sensitive technology. So that is a part of the immigration process that takes place within the employer. So the employer does all of that, but then immigration like checks and makes sure that it's been done. And there are some companies that you don't think of as having sensitive technology, that do. And it's not just a government contract. Certainly, if there's government contracts or it's defense related, that's going to be one thing. But there are some companies that you think like, oh, they just not just, but hey, they make they make software. Like, how could that be sensitive? Or they're making servers or whatever it might be. Some companies have architecture within their organization where they can't wall it off. So maybe they could work there if the company could prevent them from accessing these certain things, but they can't. And if they can't prevent that person from accessing the sensitive technology, then they can't, onboard and hire that person. So even having your workers here in the US has national security implications. And that's also part of like where you're hiring, what you're doing, who you're hiring, all of that.
Okay, that makes sense. I do remember going to a company once, and one of my teammates happened to be on a TN visa, and we drove to the client site, and we were going to go in and help on the project we were helping on, and they said, "Oh, well, no, you're not a U.S. citizen. Only U.S. citizens are allowed on this work site." Because it was deemed to be highly classified.
Wow.
So now I understand that and understand why.
And one of the other interesting things, and this was maybe 4 weeks ago. There's been so much happening, but 4 weeks ago, there was a new memo from the government and it listed countries of concern with regard to export control. And for the first time, it mentioned China. So China is certainly becoming a more prominent focus regarding sensitive technologies and intellectual property deemed exports.
Okay, and TikTok too or something? Like, no, maybe.
I'm
Okay.
not going to talk about
Different
TikTok.
subject. Different subject altogether.
So I think that's all part of it. I mean, that's all part of the workforce planning. It's all part of global mobility. It's all part of immigration.
Okay, good. That's interesting. All right, so this is kind of a fun question because it's recently in the headlines and it's I mean, everybody is familiar with the term green card, which means US permanent residency. And so in the last couple of weeks, we start hearing headlines about a gold card, which frankly, I kind of wish would have been named a platinum card, but then Amex probably would have had a problem with that. So what's going on with this gold card?
Well, some people just love gold.
Yeah, that's right. Well,
Um, so Trump announced this, I saw it in the Wall Street Journal, I think last week. It was also brought up at it wasn't the State of the Union, but whatever they were calling the meeting last night. So he is talking about $5 million to buy a green card, and it would be called a gold card, and that there will be 250,000 of these. One thing to mention is immigration is, like I said at the beginning, typically an action required from US Congress. So typically to create a new category, it would need to go through US Congress. All presidents test the balance of their authority. So I don't know if this is going to be one of the things that the administration tries to do by executive order without going through Congress. But it would certainly be interesting to see how that works. There is already something similar. It's called the EB-5 investment program, and that is intended for people to invest money in the US and develop jobs. Frankly, that program has not gone very well. And there is a limit on those visas, like 10,000 a year. So we don't typically do those EB-5 visas. They're kind of fraught with peril from my perspective. But I think any avenue to bring in the best and the brightest, whether that's a gold card or something else, is welcome in general. So we'll see how that goes. There's no words with that yet. I think the announcement said there would be something within 2 weeks. It's only been about a week. So maybe in a week we'll know more
mhm.
about the gold card. I saw in the Wall Street Journal that Trump said that Tim Cook was going to buy them for Apple employees.
Okay, well, I mean, that is a helpful comment to make because then you think, like, does the US government is $5 million even a drop in the bucket for the US government? Like, would that even matter if we were talking about, helping companies come into the country and everything? Or is this a billionaire tax that just of billionaires who just happen to want to come into the US? But so to your point, it's saying, no, we have industries, for example, Apple, that might say, it is a business imperative for us that we stay at the forefront of technology and we want the best and the brightest at our company. And so is that, I don't know if that was a glib comment about Tim Cook buying them, but Maybe
I
not.
mean, I have no idea, but I mean, big tech companies, even big tech companies, are not going to spend $5 million for like a rank and file employee. Maybe for an executive, but for an executive, you don't need this. For an executive, there's another path. But I think what it really is about is U.S. green card holders are taxed like U.S. citizens on worldwide income. You're the tax
Oh,
person. So
right,
I
right.
think it's maybe not the $5 million, but the tax on the worldwide income that would be the draw for the U.S.
Okay, I get that. Where taxation is based on residency, and if they're residents of the U.S. and you're a green card or would make you a resident of the U.S., and then if you're a resident, you're taxed on worldwide income.
Yeah,
So it's possible,
maybe,
possible,
maybe.
yeah. But it's an interesting play on that, and to see what that does or what that creates, and who leverages access to the US like that. I mean, certainly we do have a market and an economy, and I think that's what you and I were talking about yesterday, that people realize that if they can sell goods in the US, because I know I buy a lot of goods and shopping, and I love shopping. But if they can tap into a US market, then it could mean a lot more for them. So those are really good points. Okay. Um,
Would
so
this
I
be a good
know,
time for questions, Noel?
oh yeah,
That work?
sure. Okay, great. Well, yeah, let's open it up. And if you guys want to put questions in the chat, we'll be happy to go through those. Okay, I'm going to start with Drew's question. So, how do startup smaller firms without significant legal resources navigate the H-1B sponsor process?
So it is a random lottery. So they have the same access to it that any of the big tech companies do. So they just need to generally get an immigration lawyer and they take care of everything. The smaller startup companies do have more challenges because immigration is super old school. So they want to see like a brick and mortar's office location. And often startups are like, oh, we all work from home. And it's like, that's not cool, guys. Like you need a real office. This is like for grown-ups.
Okay.
So they need a brick and mortar office. You know, they need everything else that the employers would do. And some of the questions that they might get from the immigration service that bigger companies wouldn't would be, hey, you prove to me that this person that you have enough of this professional type of work that you're going to keep this software engineer busy like 100% of the time, or you're going to keep this analyst busy 100% of the time. So those are the types of questions they get because the government's not going to let a startup hire someone who's also making the coffee and doing the signs and whatever else. Like you have to show like, hey, we're a real company and we have real professional work. But they can access the H-1B sponsorship process and participate like everyone else.
Good deal. Okay, so here's another one. When sending an employee into a new country, what role does the US Embassy in that country play in that expat's entry or adjustment to the new country?
Okay, so what typically happens is most people do have to interface with an embassy post to get a visa stamp, which used to be an ink stamp, and now it's like a fancy sticker to go in. But you'll typically go to the country, the embassy post in the country where you're located. So, for example, if I was going to take an assignment in London, I would go to the U.S. consulate in LA and get my visa stamp, and then I would go to London. So the US embassy in that other country doesn't do anything unless there's a disaster. So, if there is an emergency, like a conflict or a tsunami or something, then the US embassy,
COVID.
yeah, but I don't think they did anything in COVID though. They were like, you're on your own. But they will step in and provide emergency services to US citizens. But like that's the type of thing like you hope that you and your people never.
Right, right. Actually, we did have a lot of stories where the embassies were helping extract nationals of those countries, those like getting Americans back to the US and finding planes. So that was pretty cool. And yeah, really important. Uh, Good deal. Here's another question. For students trying to work abroad, either full-time or internships, is there any special process or concessions that are given? I know, so I can answer this kind of from a global perspective, and then Jackie, maybe a J1 visa could be an answer for that one as well. But so I know that when students are trying to work around the globe, and there's a concept of a gap year where you finish high school and you backpack around the world. But I know that a lot of the Commonwealth countries will say, hey, look, if you're part of the Commonwealth, you can work in our country for a year. So that means, when I went up to Banff in Canada, there were a lot of Australians working in Canada because they could very easily work the summer season there. They didn't have any immigration issues. And, same for going into London and working for a year as a student. So that exists. And I think you just would have to check into it on a country by country basis. And then, I don't know if Jackie, you have any secret sauce on.
No, I mean, a U.S. citizen, for example, needs work authorization to work. I mean, no one's gonna just give us work authorization. They're like, hey, you guys, you can stay in the U.S. if you want. So you would need to look into what opportunities there are. Typically, there might be more opportunities for unpaid internships because maybe you could do that as a visitor versus having to get a proper work visa. But you do want to be respectful of the laws, where you are. Like, this is not an area to mess around. Um, so, you want to be respectful of the local nation's immigration laws and all of their other laws. You don't want to get caught with something like that. It could be quite bad.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's a good point too. I mean, a lot of times, when you think of going and working in another state in the US, there's no immigration you have to worry about. You just may end up having to pay tax in another state. But when you cross a border, it's a whole different issue, and making sure that you have the right visa for getting into that country and being able to work is certainly important. And the complexity does come for internships. And so for global internships, it's sometimes easier to just not be paid, and then you can access on a different visa than if it were a paid internship. So definitely some complexities there. What challenges do companies face in ensuring with compliance and varying immigration laws when deploying employees across multiple jurisdictions?
Wait, hold on. Is that is that for me? Because I'm gonna have to read it.
It's from Antonella Tovar.
See.
It's the third up from the last. What challenges do companies face to ensure compliance with varying immigration laws?
I think one of the common areas of compliance, not just in the US, but around the world, is that employers are going to be required to pay what's considered to be the prevailing wage for that job. So the idea that you're going to bring someone and pay them less than a local worker or get labor for cheaper, isn't going to work. And so every country has some version of this. So in the US, a lot of the immigration compliance is about making sure that the employer is paying wages, but the same in Europe. So in Europe, they call it posted workers. And I'm starting to get into areas, Noel, that you know more about than me. But you can't bring someone from Poland to France and pay them less than you would pay a French worker. So every country has some version of prevailing wage compliance, and that's going to be an important part of all immigration compliance. So areas where companies get in trouble is when, in particular, employees move without telling anyone.
Yes, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Employees.
And no one likes this. Don't do this when you get a job. So you can't work in Austin and then show up in San Jose, California or New York, because then the company's not paying the right taxes. They're not paying the right wages. You're going to get in big trouble if the employer finds out. But the same thing internationally. So during COVID, especially, people would turn up in Costa Rica, and guess what? They'd get fired. You can't just go work wherever. And all over Europe, the same.
I know. Oh, what was it? I was talking to a friend, and I have to bite my tongue because nobody wants to me to advise them on stuff. They're just like, yeah, so I've been up working in Canada because my new wife-to-be is working on her immigration, but she can't get into the US yet. So I'm just hanging out in Canada working for my company, my Texas company. And I'm like, oh my God, you know how bad that is.
Yeah, it's really
Because
bad.
just because you can cross the border and can log in remotely from another country doesn't mean that you're in compliance with immigration laws and tax laws. So yes, that's a stealthy thing to do for sure.
And we are, I mean, clients are trying, employers are trying to keep an eye on where people are. So they're looking at badge swipes. They're looking at all of that. So if you think like they're not going to find out, they're going to find out.
They're gonna find out for sure. Okay, let's look at this other question. With constant news and discussions about policy changes in business immigration, how do you determine which potential changes are worth taking seriously? What key factors or sources do you rely on to stay ahead? How do you assess the real impact on businesses before change becomes official?
It's a big project right now. So, for example, I work closely with our head of government affairs in DC,
Yeah.
and we look to him to tell us, like, he's like, hey, this thing is going to happen. Or, the government might shut down on March 14. And we're like, is it real? Because if it's real, we got to do some stuff to get ready. So we work closely with our government affairs. I also, for example, right now built a special structure to monitor all of this since January 20. So every week I have this group of attorneys that are assigned to watch for every single little thing. And then it comes up and we say like, okay, yeah, this is serious. Do these things on it, or no, don't worry about that. And then we just do that every day. And it's been like 3 things a day. And especially I have someone assigned for Fridays at 5, because that's when all the news tends to drop.
Right, right. No,
So
I
it's
agree.
it's not easy, and we sort of built a whole structure to try to catch all of it right now.
Well, I mean, you and I are both fortunate in that we work for large organizations and that do have like regulatory departments that look into a lot of these changes that impact the professions. I mean, what we do and the advice that we're giving. So that is very helpful. Okay, there are a couple more. These are great questions, you guys. Thank you. Does the US have a program similar to the high potential individual visa program in the UK? If the goal is to attract qualified professionals, does this policy work better at something than something like the gold card?
Okay, I'm not that familiar. I'm not familiar with the HPI visa program in the UK, but I think it's probably similar. Like in Canada, there's points.
Hmm.
And you can basically sponsor yourself if you have certain points. And so like for each degree level you have, you get a certain number of points. And if you're a certain age, like younger is better, you'll all be happy to know that. But like you start getting points off, I think if you hit 40 or something. So there are other systems. I don't think that the US has necessarily built the most finely tuned or proactive or reactive immigration policy in the US. So I do think there are other countries that are doing things different and better, and certainly could be a model for the US.
Good deal. Okay, here's one. How can global companies keep their teams moving with the changing US immigration rules? Like, how do they pivot if they run into roadblocks?
Well, we're trying to identify and provide the right guidance and counsel in the beginning, but there are going to be surprises and we can't, prevent all of that. But I think a lot of what the companies are doing is not just immigration, but geopolitical. Like, where is it safe to invest? Which countries are stable, which countries are, playing nicely with the United States. I think the tax law, I think all of it is a lot larger than immigration.
Okay, Jackie, you're gonna like this one. This is a little bit of a softball. What challenges have you encountered personally throughout your career as it pertains to international business, or any cultural differences that you faced, and how did you overcome it?
Oh, I don't know that you overcome them. You just like keep at it. So I would say this, Noel. I mean, for example, I do a lot of work with people in the UK,
Okay.
and it seems like we would be quite speaking the same language. And I sometimes just cannot get to the bottom of it. You know, Americans are very direct and we sort of expect that in return. And sometimes you just can't get to the bottom of it. What do you think about that for an example?
Yeah, two countries separated by a common language. Is that-
And I do think one of the things that is helpful is in person. So I think it can be hard on email. I think it can be hard in meetings. So, for example, we opened an office in Belfast,
Uh-huh.
which is in Northern Ireland, the UK. And so we have a large team there. We have like 100 paralegals in Belfast. And and they are terrific. And it's been really, really good for our business. But sometimes they're so polite that it's real hard to get to the bottom of, you know, what's is there a problem? Like, and if so, what?
We're
What is
we're not like that at all, are we? No.
no, we'll just straight up tell you. So I think going over there and spending time with them helps. So it sort of helps decode, you know, what the problem is. But they don't want to tell you that there's a problem. And
Gotcha.
especially, you know, if someone's being a jerk. Like they're never gonna say like, hey, this guy's a jerk. And so you kind of have to like get to that some other way.
I love that. No, but those are real issues, and it does impede, business because we take for granted our interpersonal skills, and sometimes it's good, and sometimes direct is good, and sometimes it's just offensive. I mean, can you imagine that we would be considered offensive, Jackie? I don't know about that. Um, well, good. I think I'm so excited. These were really lovely questions and really kept the conversation going. And hopefully, you guys have learned something a little bit more. I love what I do. Jackie, you can tell, radiates what she does. I've had the good fortune to be at dinners with her, to have her present at some of my conferences, and it's just been a lovely partnership. I sit in Dallas. Jackie is just down the road from you guys, downtown in Austin. And so I'm trying to pull her in closer to the CGB. So hopefully you'll be seeing some more of her. But I am so pleased that CGB puts on this speaker series. It is really a lovely thing. You guys are so fortunate to have access to this and get to expand your networks from an early age. But great. Thank you for having us and for paying attention. And we'll see you guys at the next one.
Thanks. I'm a big fan.